Hey, good morning to everyone. Today we're going to be learning very applicable information regarding Reish Mem Tes, Siman Reish Mem Tes, Siv Beis. We're going to start with highlighting some of the points from the Dirshu Mishnah Brura, and then we're going to take it from there from very relevant halachas and clarification on this Sif, which requires a tremendous amount of research to properly understand it. This, I thought, out of all the Dirshu notes, was the most interesting. The truth of the matter is, we already discussed this concept in Siman Reish Ayin Daled, but we're going to learn about it a little bit more because we overlooked this specific point. Footnote 20 over here essentially is a quote from the Kaf HaChaim over in Siman Reish Ayin Daled, as we'll see momentarily. Which over here, the question is, could a person fulfill his obligation of having a meal on Shabbos, a suda with pasaba bekistin, with something which is mezonos, such as crackers, cake, cookies, or does a person specifically need to wash and say the bracha of hamotzi on challah, bread? So the Kaf HaChaim over here relates that this is actually subject to a machlokas. According to the Sefer Shoise the Yunka, he says you would fulfill your obligation. However, the Yosef Oimetz says you would not fulfill your obligation unless you set your meal over it, which is interesting in of itself because people typically do. Here's the Kaf HaChaim firsthand in very clear print, where it's the same exact ruling that he says over here. I happen to try to look up these farm that he's quoting. Now, that's one point that he makes. So that's the Kaf HaChaim. In the next footnote, they quote that the Vilna Gaon would only make kiddush in the morning once, where he was gonna have his actual suda, his actual meal on Shabbos, not what everyone does nowadays in shul, where they have their mazonos in shul, then they go back home and they eat again. The Vilna Gaon would not opt for that choice. And this is quoted by the Be'er Halach in Siman Reish Ayin Gimel and Hilchas Kiddush and Sifei Dibur Masku Kosvu. Now, the truth of the matter is that this is something which we already discussed over here at the end of this lengthy Be'er Halacha in Dibur Hamaskul Mutter in our Sif, where the second half of this Be'er Halacha was quoting the Darach Moshe, and we'll go into that more, and the Be'er Halacha himself ruled that men of great deeds should be stringent on themselves and not have the Kiddush in the shul. Rather, immediately after Kiddush, wash your hands and then eat the actual bread. And there's several reasons that we discuss this. The most simple explanation, and this is why it's in this specific sif that we're learning, is because we're learning about the halachas of how much is a person allowed to eat before Shabbos, and it depends on how much time before Shabbos and the quantity and the type of meal that one is going to be eating. So that's why this is over here. There's a major concern that a person is going to fill up from all the food at the Kiddush in the shul, and then not have an appetite for the actual sudo, the meal when he gets home, which is going to be a halachic issue. Additionally, there's a problem of a person might be reciting a bracha she'eina sricha, an unnecessary bracha. Shulchan Aruch Harav already defends that with a tremendous amount of length in the Shulchan Aruch Harav and Sifkat and Dalit and Arsim and Reish Mem Tes, tremendous amount of length. The Vilna Gaon, the reason why he held this way, and the reason why it's specifically in Siman Reish Ayin Gimel, is because over there it discusses the halachas of Ein Kiddush Elba Makom Suda, which means that the only place where one is allowed to make Kiddush is the place of where his meal is going to be. So, in short, nowadays people are what's called Koveya Makom Suda. They establish a place where they're going to be eating, aka by in shul they're going to have a mezainis, and they're going to have enough to say bracha achrona after nalamechi, and that's considered a meal, so to say, but it's only b'di'evid. It's not preferable to do that. So that's why the Vilna Gaon himself would only recite Kiddush where he's going to have his actual meal. However, even so, we can't deny the fact that the Be'er Halacha relates that a person should not protest those who are lenient in this regard. don't protest those who do eat at a Kiddush and Shul. So if a person wants to be stringent upon himself, he wants to be anshe ma'aseh shemachmirin la'atzman, makom de'efshar, so then don't have the Kiddush in the Shul. You want to be stringent on yourself. But other people are certainly allowed to. It's halachically permissible.
Don't stuff your brains out.
So for sure, you don't stuff your brains out. That was the conclusion of the Be'er Halacha. So then, in the end of this derasha, they quote from the Sharal's Tshuva Shalmas Chaim in Siman Reish Samach Tes. They say you should be stringent like the girl, and you should for sure return and make Kiddush again additional time before the Suda. Well, what exactly is this talking about? Someone who wants to be stringent like the Vilna Gaon should make Kiddush again when he gets home. First of all, it's in Siman Reish Samach Tes. This tshuva over here, which is on the screen, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. And the reason why it's over there is because that has to do with some places that have the custom to recite Kiddush and Shul on Shabbos and Yom Tov night. No one really eats there. They do it to keep up the custom, as we learned over there, and for other reasons. So if someone would have Kiddush and Shul, and then they get back home, so then there's always the question of, wait a second, everyone already heard Kiddush and Shul. We all established a meal there. Do we need to do it again? So he says yes. It's correct to make Kiddush again in a second time, even though everyone already fulfilled their obligation in the shul. The footnote over here, he quotes the Chuvas Van Hagos from Moshe Sternbach, who says that is the custom to make Kiddush an additional time. At night, you wouldn't, if this would ever happen at night for some reason. But during the day, you definitely would.
That you wouldn't what?
Make Kiddush again if you already were Koveya Makom Suda in Shul, even though typically we don't do this based on the Be'er Halacha that we're learning, which we're going to discuss as we continue today. That's basically the main notes that I thought that were applicable coming out of the Dershu with an additional analysis and insights added to them. Let's get a little review on our SIF because really we only spent one session on it. There's basically three different levels when it comes to it being permissible to eat before Shabbos and how much one is allowed to eat. The most halachically problematic level is if a person is going to have what's called a Suda Umishta She'inu Rogil B'Me'achol, a very large meal with drinking that is atypical or typical of a typical weekday meal, which means a weekday meal a person doesn't eat as much as when he's going out for a celebration or on a Shabbos and Yom Tov, or if it's a big simcha, a wedding, whatever it is. So the problem is that could cause you to now not be hungry. You're going to lose your appetite now going into Shabbos, which is going to be an issue over here. So that is an issue because you have to go into Shabbos with an appetite. This prohibition applies the entire day. The simple explanation is so that you should have an appetite. However, the Be'er Halacha over here in Dibur HaMatzim B'nei Kavod quotes a Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim who says that this has absolutely nothing to do with an appetite. Rather, according to the Pri Megadim, the issue over here is that it's a zilzul to Shabbos. You are belittling Shabbos. That's going to be a problem. You have to go in to Shabbos when you're hungry. And he says over here, the Oz Vahadar Mishnah Berurah adds over here, it doesn't have to do with an appetite per se, like the Shulchan Aruch says. Rather, the main reason is you're being mezalzel b'zeh kavod Shabbos. You are belittling the honor of Shabbos from the fact that now you are treating before Shabbos by having a lavish, super lavish meal. You are treating before Shabbos like Shabbos. You are equating the two, and that is a problem. That belittles Shabbos. This is level one. This would apply the entire day. Certainly in the winter, it would be logical that this will apply. The question is in the summer. So you mean to tell me that you can't have a very large meal at night in the morning if you're not going to be eating until 9:15, 9:30 at night? So the simple explanation is it would be fine to have a very big meal then, because you know that you're going to have an appetite later. Because that's the main concern of this, having an appetite and not belittling the Shabbos. That very well, even according to Prima Godim, wouldn't be a problem, because the only problem that it might be is now this other Be'er Halacha. This Be'er Halacha is also within level number one. He's concerned over here about someone who eats very large meals every single day. A very lavish meal every single day. For example, if the fella is a very wealthy individual and every single day he has very large meals. You could say a lot of people are like this nowadays. So surprisingly, the Be'er Halacha over here doesn't suggest having additional food on Shabbos, because it already seems like you have every food that you could during the week. So he just says, first of all, you have to refrain from doing this Erev Shabbos, tone it down a notch on your meal, because you have to have an appetite. Okay, fine. So the guy's going to have an appetite. He strategically changes the timing of his meal, and he has it so that it'll be enough time in between when he concludes the meal and when he is going to have the davening in here? Oh, okay, fine, good. So now he strategically over here is now going to change what he's doing over here. Right, so again, one more time. So the fellow over here, he's strategically changing the timing of the meal so that it's going to be timed appropriately, so that he's going to have an appetite going into Shabbos, not going to be belittle Shabbos. However, he still has to make his Shabbos, the meal that he's going to have on Shabbos, he has to make it different than his every single day weekday meal. So in this case, what he would do is he has to do a shinui b'sudas hayom. And the Be'er Halacha recommends changing the timing of your meal, because you can't change the quantity at a qualitative and a quantitative level of what you're doing over here. Why? Because every single day he's already maxed out of what he's doing. So rather what he's going to do over here is he has to change the timing to make it now different and makes it evident that you're doing it Shabbos. This is all within level one. Now, there's a lot of specifics over here within level one of the type of meal that you could have, to the extent that even if it's a meal which has a mitzvah associated with it, we're talking about an eris and someone got engaged and the like. But the idea is that it's not time sensitive, that it has to be exactly at that time. All right. So you have to be careful with that, because it doesn't have to be at that time. This is level two. A suda, a meal which is going to be a mitzvah, and it's at a specific time, for example, Mila, right? A pigeon haben, that you're allowed to do. That's already going to be more lenient. You're allowed to do that. Now, even when you're allowed to do that, the question is, does that mean that you have a blanket heter the entire day, that you could go forward with that any time of the day? So we're going to have to see more details about this. The simple explanation is that it should be limited to the morning, which typically it is, because there's reason mitzvahs, you wanted to be quick to do a mitzvah, Gemara Pesachim Davdal. But there's still something to suggest, Svardim, they could do pidyon ben late. There's something to discuss over there. So the difference between level one versus it's not time sensitive, that it has to be specifically that day, versus a level two, which you could be more lenient. Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos. We're going to have to discuss the details of that more. Level three is we're talking about you're not having a super duper lavish meal that is atypical of a weekday meal. Rather, you're having a meal. You're having a meal, however, it's not a kviyah suda. You might even be washing, but it's not a very, very lavish meal. Guess what? The entire day is technically you're allowed to do that. However, you should refrain after 9 halachic hours into the day of that type of meal. We're going to discuss exactly what quantity this is because there's a very important. No, no. It's a meal. It's not super duper lavish. It's a regular type of meal that you have. It's a ragil. V'lechol v'lishtois bli kviya suda. It's not kviya suda. Now, it's very clear from the Be'er Halach over here that we could very well be talking about that you're washing.
Right.
You're not eating and getting satiated from the eating. You're eating a little bit, as the language of the Be'er Halach is ma'ashkit. You're eating a little bit so that it silences your hunger. Like sometimes when you don't eat for a while, your stomach makes noises saying, I'm hungry, give me some food. That is why the individual is eating, not to stuff his face like a piñata and a pig. Right? So that's going to be the difference over here. So those are the different levels. Then, of course, kind of maybe you could add a level 4, which is what's alluded to over here. If you're just having a little bit of a snack, but you're not filling up that for sure, is going to be permissible. But you have to be careful not too close to Shabbos that it could now, what's the word I'm looking for? Taint your appetite.
This is level 3 and 4.
Level 3 is you're still washing. You're still officially washing. You're having a mezainis. However, albeit it's not a lot, right? It's a minimal amount. It's just to quiet your hunger. Versus 4, if you're having, it's funny because it's not brought over here, which really the source for these halachas in the beginning of the 10th parak of Psachim, mini targima. It's not brought over here. You're having shahakal items, adama items, ha'etz items. Those are definitely more lenient. Even so, you have to be careful that now it's not going to completely take away from your appetite. That's the main goal that we have to do so that it doesn't take away from the appetite. All right. Let's discuss over here several crucial points, and we'll start analyzing some of the halachas over here. First of all, everything that we're learning about applies equally on Yom Tov as well. On Erev Yom Tov, all this applies as well. That's something to point out over here. So let me explain the idea over here behind this halacha, an additional reason which is very interesting. There's an idea of kavod Shabbos. If you're gonna have a super duper lavish meal, guess what? You're gonna be preoccupied, and excuse me, you're not gonna have ample time to prepare for Shabbos, which is an interesting reason in and of itself. It should also be pointed out that even when we say that technically from a halachic perspective, you're allowed to wash any time before the 9th halachic hour, the entire day, you're allowed to begin eating that meal, right? Even so, you should refrain from that when 9 halachic hours come into the day. So that's 3 o'clock on a perfect day. You should preferably refrain, even though technically speaking, it's permissible. In the winter, though, Shulchan also makes this point of that in the winter, when you're going to be eating at 5:15, 5:30. So you have to be careful, even if it's before 9 halachic hours into the day. Because if you're going to sit down and say, oh, 9 halachic hours into the day is, I make it the number 1:15, and you're going to be sitting down and eating over there at 1:10. Oh, remember, but if you started the meal, you don't need to stop. So let's be honest, if you're going to be starting, then you're not going to be hungry. So you have to be very careful about this, and we should remind ourselves of what the Gemara in Gittin says, that the one family, Gittin Lamed Ches, that they made lavish meals on Erev Shabbos, and guess what happened to them? They died because of this. So this is something that is serious. This is something that is part of the mitzvahs of Shabbos. It might not be the technical halachas that have to do with the actual malachas of Shabbos, but this is just as much part of Hilchah Shabbos as anything else. And this is something to contend with. I personally had the shaila myself. We're going to be learning about this. I'll just pose the shaila now. There's a minhag, it's a custom to fast on a yurt site. There's a custom on the day when one of 7 close relatives, father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, spouse passes away. So on that day, on the next year, there's a custom to fast on that day. So the question is, are you allowed to fast on Erev Shabbos? So that's going to actually be the next 2 sifim that we're going to be learning about. Fasting on Erev Shabbos. Is it a problem to go into Shabbos on a non-communal fast when you're starving, when you're very hungry, especially this time of year? You're not eating till 9 o'clock, right? So, and something else which is interesting, it's an interesting shaila. If you're fasting, something like that, and then you make early Shabbos, are you even allowed to eat yet, or do you have to wait for nighttime? So there's a lot of interesting shilas. But let's start dissecting these bear halachas and scrupulously analyzing them and figuring out exactly what we're dealing with over here. All right. Okay, let's start with this bear halacha with the prima gadim we already discussed. There's a very interesting bear halacha, which when we learned this, I arrogantly said with a lot of cocky attitude over here that this is the easiest bear halacha out of every single bear halacha. The truth is, this is not an easy bear halacha at all. Granted, it's only 4 words. Or pidyon ben v'hu adin b'siyum masechta. But it's actually, if you think about it, and I kind of thought about this when we learned it the first time, this is actually very difficult to understand. Because the Rama over here is talking about, this is level 2 in our little levels that we made up over here, our cute little levels. This is talking about if you have a meal that has a set time, and it's a mitzvah, you could go forward with the meal on Erev Shabbos. For example, a milah, pidyon ben, that's fair game. You could continue with that. Says the Be'er Halacha, you know what else is in the same category as milah and pidyon ben? Vuhadin b'siyum mesechta. Same halacha is if you finish a mesechta. What is the obvious question on that?
Siyum Masechta isn't time bound.
Yeah. What do you mean you can make a siyum any day, anytime you want? Who's forcing you to make a siyum right now? If anything, this would be even worse than a sudas eirdasin. Than if you're engaged in them. So what on earth is the explanation of this Be'er Halacha? That is my question for the crowd. What is the intention of this Be'er Halacha? So if you look over here at the Dershu Mishnah Berurah, I don't even think they quote anything about this. They don't even mention anything about this. So you're not going to get an answer over here. Oh, pidyon ben. Yeah, they are going to actually quote something about this. Pidyon ben. All right, we'll come back to that Be'er Halacha because I'm an Oz V'Hadar guy first. The beautiful analysis. If you finished the Masechta or the Seder, or you finished the whole Shas, Erev Shabbos, and now you want to gather people together. You want to gather people together to celebrate the completion that you did. It's permissible. It's a simple explanation of this Be'er Halacha. It's funny because usually we don't just spontaneously gather people for a siyum. It's usually in advance. But for some reason, you want to make a siyum on Erev Shabbos. Now we know that with the siyum comes free food and a lot of it, right? So the question is, you allowed to eat that much? Timing, when are you going to do the siyum? So they quote over here in the footnotes, Badia Shulchan. Picture. Yes, a question on this Be'er Halacha. Minale dinzeh. How does the Be'er Halacha know this? Ha'afilu b'pidyon ben shaloi bezmana. Das am agana from v'kama achronim l'tchis a pidyon ben Erev Shabbos. What do you mean? You have a pidyon ben over here, not in its time. It was already pushed off for some reason. According to the Magen Avraham and many others, don't do the pidyon ben Erev Shabbos. It's already pushed off more. The kol shekain b'siyum mesechta shaloi shayich bazel loymar. This certainly applies when it comes to a mesechta where it's not applicable to say shehu bezmana. You can't come along and say that now the pidyon ben is in its appropriate time. Excuse me, that the mesechta is in its appropriate time. It doesn't have a set time. And even according to the Nishma Sadim who hold that you shouldn't push off the pidyon ben because of shihui mitzvah, you don't want to delay a mitzvah. He would agree when it comes to finishing the mesechta. This doesn't apply nowadays. There's no prohibition of delaying a mitzvah at all. You can fulfill the mitzvah. You can start learning an ex Gemara over here. There's no mitzvah for you now to specifically learn the end of your mesechta that you're doing more than any other mesechta. So why then would it specifically be on Erev Shabbos, the pidyon ben? What's the explanation of this Be'er Halacha? Perhaps the Be'er Halacha had in mind, intended for the halacha in Siman Tavkuf Nun Aleph regarding eating meat during the 9 days. There's a well-known custom that it's prohibited, that it's customary, it's a custom not to eat meat during the 9 days, including chicken. However, if it's a Sudas mitzvah, if it's a mitzvah that you have, a meal that's a mitzvah, such as a siyum, you're allowed to. So a siyum is included in the category of a mitzvah, and you're allowed to eat during the 9 days. Oh, if now we allow you to eat meat during the 9 days, and the siyum has the status of a Sudas mitzvah, a meal that's a mitzvah, so then we will permit it Erev Shabbos as well. That perhaps could be the intention of the Ber
I think that
Halacha.
Yom is a Sudas mitzvah.
We knew that it was a mitzvah.
Right, so
So the obvious question on this explanation is, so what? It's not time sensitive.
Right,
That's the question. And that's why this Ber Halacha, there's definitely what to chew on over here.
so he didn't give an answer.
He did. He tried suggesting this answer is, oh, maybe just like we permitted during the 9 days, so too over here.
But where does the Oz Lahadar get its Boba Yom that he finished it? Didn't seem like he.
That's what everyone seems to be learning. That's if you look over here, that's how they all seem to be learning. Because it's called Siyam Bismana. It's Rav Nisim Karel.
So you have to do that 'cause you prepare
That's how they learn, or
it.
else, right, or else how would it be okay? You wouldn't have a head there, he says over here. Right.
I guess by 9 days he discusses whether you could push off a CM so you could have meat for 9 days.
During the 9 days, what's the question? I want to answer.
Push off the CM
Push it off to when? For the 9 days?
for the 9 days.
It's brought down the Mishnah Berurah. If you look over there, he says one should not push off the siyum and time it to get to the 9 days. Only if you happen to have finished then you can make the siyum. So you have to be smart when you finish it. So you have to know yourself. If you are just making something up, you give a daf yomi shir, and your mesechta finished 2 weeks before the 9 days. You can't just push that off.
That's it, right.
That's it. You're finished.
If you finish during the 9 days.
And if you're going to be eating meat, then that's really against halacha. Every bite is against halacha. Got to keep that in mind.
The places that the restaurants have, those places that have a CM every night.
Those places that are the restaurants purposely making a siyum every night and they didn't really finish then, that would definitely be halachically problematic. The next pair halacha discusses something very interesting. I don't want to rush it, but I will say this. I spent a lot of time personally going through this, and there's a tremendous amount of insight in that pair halacha. In particular, that we have to go through. Tremendous amount of insight in that pair halacha. In this one in particular, I went through this whole thing. So I don't want to rush this because we only have 7 minutes left. But this next pair halacha is incredibly fundamental. There's essentially 2 parts to it. Very few people learn this pair halacha because very few people in general learn this sif in depth and properly. At least that's my gut feeling. And I've been around the block a few times. I know what people learn, especially the people who are learning with advanced learning and learning properly. And this isn't really part of the curriculum, so to say. So we're definitely going to come back to that Ber Halacha to learn it properly because it is incredibly relevant and fascinating. That's what we're going to start with next session. But at least now, let's go into this specific point over here. The Shulchan Aruch over here at the end said, if you're not having a Kviyas Suda, which basically in English means if you're going to eat and drink, but you're not having a very lavish meal, but you're having a meal that you typically have during the week. You know, we're all rushed. No one's sitting down and feasting for hours. That's why every restaurant here has a lunch special because they try to get people to come in because no one has time to sit for more than half an hour. So people don't have time during the day. People are working. People have a quick meal here, a quick meal there. And a lot of people's jobs, they don't even have time to sit and eat. They just quickly devour something. What?
Yeah, but that's
Eat by the desk, devour something. People don't even have time to eat breakfast. They just have a coffee. People don't have time for anything. So during a week, you're having a quick meal. Right? The entire day you're allowed to start that. But it's a mitzvah to refrain from that from 9 halachic hours into the day. Comes along the Ber Halacha and says, after 9 halachic hours, by the way, it's not so simple that it's prohibited. Because you have to know, talking about after 9 halachic hours in the day, you're eating bread. Bread is something that satiates, and you're eating enough that it satiates. You're not just having one piece of rye bread. You're having like 3 or 4 pieces. That's going to be an issue. But if you're really, really hungry and just having a little, to silence your hunger, that's not included in establishing a meal regarding this. Person knows to himself, he knows he's going to be so hungry if he's going to go to shul and he hasn't eaten anything for so many hours. At least give him just a little something before shul. He's not going to be eating for another hour or so, anyways. And then when he comes home, on the contrary, that won't, I guess the word would be hinder. That won't now hinder his appetite. That won't dilute his appetite. It won't ruin his appetite. It'll help him. It's like an appetizer. When the stomach doesn't eat, it gets smaller. And when it gets smaller, that prevents a person from maximizing the amount that he could eat. So the appetizer, what it does is it attempts to begin opening the stomach, especially if there's a time gap in between the appetizer and the main course. So if you're having something, you're just opening it up. But even so, you have to be careful. You don't want to lose your appetite. Everyone has to know themselves. It's discussed. I don't think we saw this in the Mishnah Berurah, but the poskim, they certainly talk about an istinus. An istinus means someone who's very finicky. A very skinny guy where if he eats a little bit, he's going to get filled up. That might actually come in the next few sifim. So that fella has to be careful about eating Erev Shabbos. Let's take a look at the Oz V'Hadar Mishnah Berurah, how they analyze the short but fundamental Ber Halacha. I don't even know if they add anything to this one. The big one definitely does. No, like Kvoya Suda. Stay over here like this. The mitzvah is to refrain from eating a meal from 9 halachic hours and on. That's talking about if you want to eat to fill yourself up, like what you do on a weekday meal. You're eating like you regularly do in the week. You see the language? By that, you are slightly ruining your desire to eat at night. But notice the terminology that's used of this that the Ber Halacha over here is using. You are mismaye ma'at taivasav. You are slightly decreasing your appetite to eat at night. Remember, there are different levels over here. This isn't the end of the world from a halachic perspective, but it's not preferable. You're not completely ruining your appetite. We're going to learn Amir Hashem tomorrow when we analyze this Ber Halacha properly. Food comes in many different shapes, sizes, and forms, and so does how much does a person eat and how full they get. We're going to learn about if a person eats so much before Shabbos that he goes into Shabbos and he feels like it's almost, he gets nauseous when he eats more because he already ate so much. That's a major problem. That's Shal Yudezem Ismail Harbe times. We're going to have to even handle if a person ate in that circumstance, is that even halachically considered eating? That's what we're going to discuss tomorrow. Let's assume not, by the way.
Right.
It doesn't even count as eating, even if you swallowed it. Because it's achilas gasa. It's bal tashkas on your body. It's bal tashatsu. It's an abomination. Achilas gasa isn't even considered eating. Look at the Ran and Psachim Sadi Tesamad Aleph over there on the Mishnah. When he talks about achilas gasa, he brings a raya, if not mistaken, from Maseches Trumos. If you eat truma, when you were totally full and it's achilas gasa, regarding tashlumin for keren v'choimish, how much you need to pay back if you need to pay back an additional fifth. Might not even be considered eating. Also on Yom Kippur. All right, it's another discussion. Al Kapanan, the idea over here is that what? You are slightly decreasing your appetite. Eina b'chlal kvi yesudin linezeh. That's not subject to this prohibition that we're talking about. That it's prohibited to establish lechatchila, preferably on Erev Shabbos. Remember, you still fulfill your obligation. As long as you have some appetite, for sure you're good, even if you ate before. But it's not preferable to do so. It's not lechatchila. So comes the Oz V'Hadar Mishnah beautifully explaining this Be'er Halacha. It's mutter lechatchila le'echol suda kazoi af la'acher teisha shas b'yoyim. This type of meal, we're talking about it's after 9 halachic hours into the day. Imagine 4:30 in the afternoon, 4:45 in the afternoon. The guy's sitting down and he's washing. Guess what? It's not the end of the day. He's washing on one piece of bread. It's permissible.
Slices.
Hold on. It's permissible. Lechatchila, you're allowed to do that. If you're so hungry and there's nothing else for you to eat in the house, and you have one slice of rye bread at 4:45, and your suit is going to be 4 hours and a half later, that's fine. Lechatchila. There's no problem with it. Look, in the winter, you want to talk about it. Oh, the winter. That would certainly be an issue. Because now you're only having it a couple hours before your meal. But in the summer, says the Be'er Halacha, and we'll end with this leniency that very few people are aware even exists. Permissible, even Lechachili, allowed to do it. Totally fair game. All right, Amir Hashem, tomorrow we're going to tackle this long Be'er Halacha. It's crucial Be'er Halacha. Tremendous amount of insight with other very important halachas delving right in. Tomorrow we're going to wrap up this sifton. Everyone have a wonderful day.